The sun hung low over the horizon, casting a fiery orange glow across the desolate landscape. It was a sight that had once filled Commander Andrew Holt with pride. But now, it only reminded him of the life he had left behind. The days of fighting for Earth's survival, of making impossible decisions, seemed like distant memories. He had retired years ago, leaving behind the horrors of war for a peaceful life. But peace, he realized, could only last so long. His small cabin, tucked away in a quiet corner of the world, had been a refuge. Here, no one asked for his help, no one demanded his expertise. He lived in solitude, walking the hills and watching the seasons change, hoping to erase the dark chapters of his past. He had earned this peace, he thought. Until the phone call came. Commander Holt? The voice on the other end was familiar, but it sent a shiver down his spine. It was the voice of Captain Jackson, his old comrade in arms, the one person who could still break through Holt's ironclad resolve. Yes? Holt answered, his voice gruff. We need you, Jackson said. There was no time for pleasantries, no explanation for the urgency. Holt could hear the panic in Jackson's voice. The aliens, they're back. Holt's heart skipped a beat. He had hoped this day would never come. The aliens, a powerful and mysterious force from beyond the stars, had invaded Earth years ago, and humanity had barely survived. But in the end, Earth had fought back, pushing the invaders back into space. Or so they had thought. What do you mean, they're back? Holt asked, already feeling the weight of the decision he had to make. They've launched a full-scale invasion. No one knows how they managed to return, but they're here, and they're more advanced than before. We're losing, Holt. Fast. The whole world is at risk. Jackson's voice faltered. Holt's mind raced. The world was crumbling again, and he was being called back into the fight. He had sworn never to pick up a weapon again, but the stakes were higher than ever. Humanity's survival was on the line. And he was the one person who could rally what remained of Earth's military forces. All right, Holt said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. I'll be there. As soon as he hung up, Holt stood, his old military jacket hanging in the closet like a forgotten relic. He hadn't worn it in years, but now it felt like a second skin. The battle was calling, and there was no turning back. Holt was about to re-enter the war that had almost destroyed him. Days later, Holt arrived at the makeshift command center. It was in a cold, underground bunker, deep beneath a military base. The place was alive with activity, the hum of computers and the low murmur of voices filling the air. Officers, analysts, and soldiers rushed from one task to another, their faces set in grim determination. The weight of the situation was palpable. Holt was greeted by Captain Jackson and General Thomas, a woman he had once admired for her strategic mind. But her eyes, now dull with exhaustion, told a different story. This battle was taking its toll on everyone. Commander, General Thomas said, offering him a firm handshake. It's good to have you back. Holt didn't return the smile. Instead, he glanced around the room, scanning the faces of the team that had been trying to hold the line. What's the situation? We're on the brink, Jackson said, pointing to a large holographic map of the world, dotted with red markers indicating alien hotspots. They've already taken several key locations, and they're advancing at an alarming rate. We can't stop them. Holt's eyes narrowed. The alien invaders were unlike anything humanity had ever faced. Their technology was far superior, their tactics unpredictable. And they were ruthless. Holt had seen the destruction they could cause. He knew that Earth had no chance unless they found a way to fight back. Just then, a young woman entered the room, her face obscured by the light from her computer screen. Commander, she said, her voice confident but with an edge of uncertainty. I've found something. Holt turned toward her, instantly recognizing her as Dr. Sarah Jenkins, a brilliant scientist who had once worked with Holt on a top-secret project. She was known for her groundbreaking research, but this new development had him intrigued. Sarah was known for seeing things that others missed. If she had discovered something, it could be the breakthrough they desperately needed. "What is it, Dr. Jenkins?" Holt asked. Sarah's eyes were filled with determination as she turned to face the group. "The aliens, they're using a form of energy we've never encountered before. I think it's the key to defeating them." The room fell silent. Holt felt a flicker of hope. If Sarah was right, they had a chance. But something about her discovery didn't sit well with him. "How do we stop them?" Holt asked. Sarah paused, as if considering the weight of her next words. "That's the problem. I don't know yet. But we have to find out. Quickly." Holt knew that time was running out. If the aliens had a new weapon, humanity's only chance was to discover a way to counter it. And that meant finding Sarah's solution before it was too late. As Holt walked through the base, preparing for the inevitable, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something. The aliens had evolved, grown stronger, and smarter. And now, with Sarah's discovery, they had a glimmer of hope. But Holt wasn't sure if that hope would be enough. As he gazed out at the stars through a small window, he realized that this was humanity's last hope. The final stand. And whether they would succeed or fail rested in their hands alone. The ground trembled beneath Commander Holt's boots as the explosion reverberated through the base. The air was thick with the sound of sirens, and the once calm and organized control room erupted into chaos. Officers scrambled, shouting orders and darting between monitors, trying to make sense of the disaster unfolding outside. Holt's instincts kicked in as he moved quickly through the corridor, his mind racing. "Commander." Captain Jackson's voice cut through the confusion. Holt turned to see his old comrade rushing toward him, her face pale but determined. "They've breached the perimeter," Jackson said, her voice steady despite the panic surrounding her. "We don't have much time." Holt's eyes narrowed. The alien invaders were more coordinated than ever. This wasn't just an attack, it was a full-scale assault. The world had underestimated their strength, their intelligence. They had no idea what they were dealing with, but Holt knew one thing: humanity couldn't afford to be complacent. "Where's Dr. Jenkins?" Holt asked. He needed to hear from her directly, her discovery was their only lead. "She's in the lab, but," Jackson hesitated, her face reflecting the gravity of the situation. "The aliens have targeted her research facility. We need to get to her before they do." Without a second thought, Holt turned on his heel, motioning for Jackson to follow. They rushed down the corridors, dodging frantic personnel as they made their way to the lower levels, where Dr. Sarah Jenkins had been working tirelessly on a solution to defeat the aliens. The base was on high alert, and every moment felt like a countdown to the unknown. The lab was eerily quiet when Holt and Jackson arrived, the door slightly ajar. Inside, Sarah sat hunched over a holographic display, her fingers flying over the controls. Her focus was unwavering, but she looked up as they entered, her eyes wide with a mix of exhaustion and determination. "We're running out of time," Sarah said without preamble. "I think I've found a way to neutralize their power source, but I need to get access to their central hub. Without that, it's useless." Holt felt a flicker of hope. Sarah had always been brilliant, but this was different. "Tell me what you need," he said, his voice calm but firm. Time was no longer a luxury. Sarah's gaze shifted to a map of the alien network, a sprawling array of glowing lines and dots that stretched across the planet. "There's a facility in the Arctic Circle where the aliens are gathering their energy. If we can infiltrate it, we might be able to destroy their core, but it won't be easy. Their defenses are brutal." Holt's mind raced. An assault on an alien facility in the Arctic? It was a suicide mission. But without this breakthrough, they had no hope of survival. "We'll have to make do with what we have," Holt said, already forming a plan. "I'll take a team. We'll hit them hard and fast. We don't have time for a drawn-out mission." Jackson, who had been listening intently, nodded in agreement. "We'll need a full strike force. If we can take out the core, it might cause a chain reaction. It could bring down their entire network." Sarah hesitated, clearly torn. "It's risky. If we fail." "If we fail," Holt interrupted, "then humanity fails. This is our only shot." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what was at stake, and there was no turning back. They were all in this together, whether they liked it or not. Holt met Sarah's eyes, seeing the same resolve that had driven her to find the solution in the first place. The plan was dangerous, but it was their only chance. "We leave in 20 minutes, Holt said, breaking the silence. "Get everything you need. Jackson, prep the team. We move fast." As Holt and his team prepared for the mission, the weight of what they were about to do settled on their shoulders. Soldiers suited up, weapons checked, and the cold, hard reality of their situation hung in the air. This was it. There were no second chances. Holt paced in the command center, running through the plan in his mind. He had led troops into battle countless times, but this felt different. The alien forces were unlike anything humanity had ever faced. They didn't just invade, they adapted, learned, and countered every move humanity had made. It was as if they had been preparing for this war for years. "This is our last chance," Holt muttered to himself, glancing at the holographic display showing the alien encampments. The Arctic facility was their target, but the aliens knew they were coming. Holt had no illusions about the difficulty of the task ahead. "Commander," Jackson said, stepping up beside him. "We're ready." Holt nodded, steeling himself for the mission ahead. There was no room for doubt, no time for hesitation. "Let's go." As they boarded the transport ship, Holt felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread. The cold air of the Arctic, the thick snowstorms, the alien presence, all of it pressed in on them as they flew toward their target. Holt's team was a mix of soldiers, scientists, and engineers, each one bringing a vital skill to the table. But none of them had faced an enemy like this. None of them knew what awaited them on the icy, alien-controlled terrain. The journey was tense. Every creak of the ship, every shift in the atmosphere made Holt's grip tighten around the armrest. This was it, the point of no return. They were about to face their greatest challenge yet. The transport ship shuddered violently as it descended toward the Arctic base. The roar of alien weaponry rang out in the distance, each blast sending shockwaves through the frigid air. Holt's hands tightened around the armrests of his seat, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had been in countless battles, but this felt different. Every part of his being screamed that something wasn't right. He glanced around at his team. Captain Jackson, standing by the communication panel, was focused, her jaw set with determination. Dr. Sarah Jenkins, seated across from him, appeared lost in thought, her fingers running over a small device that seemed to hold the key to their success. The rest of the team was just as tense, every soldier and technician bracing for the unknown. But despite the steely exterior, Holt could feel the fear just beneath the surface. The same fear that he carried within him. "We're almost there," Jackson said, her voice clipped. "Prepare for landing." The ship descended, its engines roaring louder with each passing second. Outside, the snowy landscape of the Arctic stretched out like a barren wasteland, the wind howling in the distance. Holt scanned the horizon, waiting for any signs of movement from the alien forces. The ship hit the ground with a bone-jarring thud, the ramp immediately lowering. Holt led the charge, his boots crunching in the snow as the team followed in formation. The icy wind bit into their faces, but the chill didn't matter. They had a mission. And they would complete it, no matter the cost. "Stay sharp," Holt ordered, motioning for Jackson to take the lead. "We don't know what we're walking into." The team spread out, moving through the snow and toward the entrance of the alien facility. The walls of the structure loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, as if the very building itself were a living entity. Holt's breath clouded in the cold air, but his focus never wavered. The fate of Earth was in their hands. As they entered the facility, the eerie silence of the place overwhelmed them. The walls were slick with some sort of alien substance, and the air smelled faintly of metal and something else, something that made the hairs on the back of Holt's neck stand on end. They moved cautiously, weapons raised, their every step echoing off the cold, sterile walls. "We're in," Jackson whispered, her voice tense. "Dr. Jenkins, where's the core?" Sarah, her eyes glued to the map in her hand, gestured to a nearby hallway. "This way. We'll need to bypass several security checkpoints before we reach the central hub." The team moved quickly, the tension rising with each passing second. Holt could feel the pressure mounting. The aliens knew they were here. They had to move fast before they were overwhelmed. They had no margin for error. It wasn't long before they encountered their first obstacle. A blast of energy shot out from the walls, narrowly missing Jackson. The team ducked, taking cover behind a row of alien structures. Holt's heart raced as he scanned the area. The aliens were onto them. "Get ready!" Holt shouted, motioning for his team to return fire. The battle erupted in a flurry of gunfire and explosions as the team fought back against the alien forces. Despite their advanced technology, the team was holding their own, but just barely. Holt fired his weapon, hitting an alien drone square in the chest. It crumpled to the ground with a metallic screech. But there were more coming. The alien forces seemed endless, their numbers overwhelming. "Push forward!" Holt shouted, his voice grim. "We need to get to that core before they close in on us." As the team advanced, Holt couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There was an odd tension in the air, a feeling that the aliens were deliberately holding back. It was almost as if they were waiting for something. Just as they reached the final security checkpoint before the central hub, Holt's worst fears were realized. The entire corridor lit up, and suddenly, members of his team were under fire from behind. The sound of blaster shots rang out, and Holt spun around, eyes wide with shock. "Jackson!" Holt shouted, but it was too late. She had already been struck by a blast, her body crumpling to the floor. "Fall back!" Holt ordered, his voice sharp with panic. But as his team tried to retreat, the truth hit him like a cold wave: someone had sabotaged their mission from within. Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. "It's him. It's Sergeant Owens." Holt turned to see Owens, once a trusted member of their team, standing at the back of the group. The look in his eyes was cold, nothing like the man who had fought beside him for years. "You." Holt's voice was filled with rage. "You betrayed us." Sergeant Owens sneered, stepping forward, his weapon aimed at Holt. "You were never supposed to win. The aliens promised me a seat at their table. Humanity was always expendable." The rest of the team stood frozen, shocked by the revelation. Holt felt a surge of betrayal, his mind racing. Owens had been with them through it all, and now, in their most desperate hour, he had turned on them. "Why, Owens?" Holt demanded, his voice low with fury. "What did they promise you?" "The same thing they promise everyone," Owens spat, his grin widening. "Power. A future beyond the limits of Earth." The betrayal hit Holt like a punch to the gut. But there was no time to dwell on it. The alien forces were closing in, and now, with Owens' treachery, the odds were worse than ever. The explosion sent a shockwave through the facility, throwing Holt and his team to the ground. The walls trembled as the lights flickered, and for a brief moment, everything was a blur of smoke, dust, and confusion. Holt struggled to his feet, his head pounding from the impact. His heart raced as he scanned the room, eyes darting from one teammate to the next. "Report." Holt barked, his voice sharp despite the ringing in his ears. Jackson, who had been hit by a blast earlier, was on her knees, grimacing in pain but still alive. "I'm good," she groaned, wiping blood from her forehead. "But we've got bigger problems." Holt turned to see Owens making his escape through a narrow passageway. The traitor was moving fast, disappearing into the shadows of the facility, and Holt knew they didn't have much time before he vanished completely. Owens had been their link to the alien forces, and now that link was severed. Without him, they would be left blind, unsure of where to strike next. But Holt's gut told him that pursuing Owens wasn't their only problem. The alien forces were closing in. "Focus," Holt commanded, his voice cutting through the haze. "We need to finish this now, before they lock us in here." The team moved quickly, staying low to the ground. They'd lost the element of surprise, but Holt knew they had one chance left to make this mission count. They had to reach the core and disable the alien power source, before it was too late. Every minute that passed brought the enemy closer to victory, and humanity's survival was hanging by a thread. They crept through the winding hallways of the alien facility, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the soft hum of alien machinery. The walls were alive with strange, pulsing lights, the air thick with the unmistakable smell of alien technology. Holt's pulse quickened as they neared the central chamber. This was it, the final stretch. "We're close," Sarah muttered, her eyes fixed on the glowing map projected from her wrist device. "The core is just ahead, but we need to breach the main access door." Holt nodded, his mind calculating their next steps. They'd already dealt with the alien forces once, but this time would be different. They had no idea what new defenses awaited them. The aliens weren't just invaders, they were calculating and prepared for everything. But Holt had learned long ago that when facing the impossible, humanity's resilience was their greatest weapon. "I'll go first," Jackson volunteered, her voice steady despite her injuries. "We can't waste any time." "No," Holt said quickly, placing a hand on her arm. "You're too hurt. Stay behind me." Jackson shot him a fierce look, but she nodded in reluctant agreement. They couldn't afford to risk anyone else. Holt motioned for the team to spread out, taking a deep breath before moving toward the main door. As they reached the entrance, Holt stopped, signaling for the team to halt. He turned to Sarah, his mind racing through every scenario. "How long will it take to disable the core once we're inside?" Sarah's eyes flickered to the holographic map again. "I'll need at least 5 minutes. But if we're interrupted, if anything goes wrong, it could take much longer." Holt's mind raced. 5 minutes was a luxury they didn't have. The alien forces were closing in, and Owens was still out there, likely gathering reinforcements. Holt's instincts told him they needed to make a desperate gamble, something that would give them just enough time to finish the mission. The decision came fast. Holt motioned to Jackson and the rest of the team to prepare for a distraction. "We'll make a break for it," he said. "I'll set off an explosive charge at the far end of the facility to draw their attention. Sarah, you and the rest of the team stay close. Once the door opens, you go straight for the core." Sarah hesitated, but then nodded. She didn't like it, but she understood the necessity. Understood. Holt turned to the rest of the team. "We're in this together. No matter what happens, we fight until the end." As Holt moved to place the charge, he glanced back at the team. The determination in their eyes was a reflection of the same resolve he'd seen in countless soldiers before. This wasn't just a mission anymore, it was humanity's last stand. They couldn't afford to fail. Holt worked quickly, setting the charge with precision. The explosives were designed to cause maximum disruption but not enough to destroy the facility completely. The idea was simple: draw the aliens in with a decoy, give them something to focus on while Sarah and the team completed their mission. With the charge in place, Holt activated the timer and sprinted back to the team. The hum of alien machinery grew louder as they moved closer to the central chamber. They could hear the alien forces just beyond the walls, their presence like a shadow closing in on them. "Ready?" Holt asked, his voice tight with urgency. "Ready," Sarah said, determination flashing in her eyes. As the countdown to the explosion began, Holt and the team moved quickly to the core. The massive door before them was a solid slab of alien metal, its surface smooth and impenetrable. But Sarah's expertise with alien technology was their trump card. She stepped forward, inputting the access codes into the control panel. The door groaned as it began to open, revealing the glowing core inside. The entire room seemed to pulse with energy, the walls humming with a strange, alien frequency. Holt's pulse quickened as he stepped inside, signaling for the team to follow. Suddenly, a deafening explosion rocked the facility. Holt didn't need to look, he knew the decoy charge had gone off. The sounds of alien alarms and footsteps echoed through the corridors as the enemy scrambled to respond. "We have 5 minutes," Sarah said, her fingers flying over the control panel. "I'm starting the process now. Get ready." Holt's heart raced as he glanced around the room. The alien core was within reach, but so was their greatest danger. The longer they stayed, the higher the chances that Owens and the alien forces would catch up to them. The room exploded into chaos. The light from the alien core pulsed like the heartbeat of some terrible creature, casting long shadows across the cold walls. Holt's senses heightened as the familiar hum of alien machinery filled the air, intensifying the pressure mounting with every passing second. The countdown for the core was ticking down, but the ticking clock was not the only threat. The alien forces had arrived. Holt heard the distinct sound of alien footsteps echoing down the hallway. The breach had been swift. They weren't just coming, they were flooding in, overwhelming any remaining resistance. "They're here!" Jackson yelled, her voice barely audible over the chaos. "Stay focused." Holt snapped back, his voice sharp with authority. "Sarah, how much longer?" Sarah, her fingers flying over the control panel, barely glanced up. 2 minutes. "I can't promise it'll be enough." Holt's mind raced as he scanned the room. The team was in position, but their options were running out. The alien forces were closing in, and every second brought them closer to their inevitable collision. If Sarah didn't finish the task in time, they would all be trapped. The first wave of alien soldiers rounded the corner, their glowing eyes reflecting the eerie light from the core. They were massive, their hulking figures towering over Holt and his team. But it wasn't their size that made Holt's blood run cold, it was the cold intelligence in their eyes. They weren't mindless invaders, they were soldiers, calculating and relentless. "Hold your ground!" Holt shouted, drawing his weapon. The team responded immediately, taking up positions and readying their guns. They were outnumbered, but they were not unprepared. They were the last line of defense. The first alien soldier lunged toward them, but Holt was faster. He fired a single shot, hitting the creature square in the chest. It staggered back, but there were more behind it, more than they could handle. Holt's heart pounded in his chest as he reloaded, knowing they couldn't keep this up for long. "Come on, Sarah," Holt muttered under his breath. He didn't care about strategy or tactics right now. He needed her to finish the job. There was no more time for hesitation. Suddenly, the room shook violently as the second wave of aliens stormed in, pushing forward with a force that threatened to overwhelm the team. Holt's mind raced. He had to buy them more time, he couldn't let Sarah's hard work go to waste. He made a snap decision. "Jackson, cover me!" Holt yelled, running toward the far side of the room. "I'll buy you time." "Are you crazy?" Jackson shouted, but there was no time to argue. Holt ducked behind a large alien pillar, his gun raised. He squeezed off a few shots, drawing the attention of the oncoming aliens. His heart raced, but his resolve never wavered. This was his duty, his final stand. To keep the alien soldiers at bay, the room seemed to grow smaller, the walls closing in. His body ached with the effort, but his focus never wavered. The alien soldiers were powerful, but Holt knew the true strength of humanity lay not in brute force, but in the resilience to face overwhelming odds. 20 seconds. Sarah's voice echoed through the room. Holt's eyes shot to her, his pulse quickening. She was so close, too close to fail now. But just as hope flickered, a sharp pain shot through Holt's side. He turned to see an alien soldier had managed to slip past his defenses. The creature had a long, jagged blade raised high, its intention clear. Holt gritted his teeth and raised his gun, firing once more. But the alien had already struck. The blade cut deep, and Holt staggered back, his breath ragged. "Commander!" Jackson cried, but Holt couldn't answer. His vision blurred as pain surged through his body. His focus wavered, and he barely registered the alien soldiers closing in. Jackson and the rest of the team were surrounded, but they weren't giving up. Holt could hear the sound of gunfire, the clash of metal against metal, and the constant hum of the alien core's energy. But through the chaos, Holt's thoughts remained on one thing: keeping Sarah safe, keeping humanity's hope alive. 10 seconds. Sarah shouted. The room trembled as the final countdown began. Holt could feel the energy of the core, vibrating in his bones, as if the entire facility was alive, responding to Sarah's attempts to shut it down. With one last push of adrenaline, Holt shoved the alien soldier away, pushing himself to his feet. Blood poured from his side, but he refused to fall. He couldn't afford to. Not now. 5 seconds. The alien soldiers were closing in on Sarah. Holt's heart pounded as the seconds ticked away. He couldn't let them stop her. With his last ounce of strength, Holt staggered forward, raising his weapon one final time. The blast from his gun echoed across the room, knocking the nearest alien soldier off balance. But there were too many. Holt could feel the overwhelming presence of the enemy, but he fought on, determined to give Sarah the time she needed. 3 seconds. The countdown echoed through the room, and just as the aliens were about to overrun them, a blinding light filled the chamber. The alien core, its energy unleashed, sent a shockwave of power that rippled through the facility. Holt collapsed to his knees, blood seeping into the cold floor beneath him. But he heard it, Sarah's triumphant shout. She had done it. The core was destabilizing, the alien energy starting to collapse in on itself. The room shook violently as the alien core began to collapse. The blinding light from the core's implosion flooded the chamber, sending a wave of heat that pushed Holt and the team back. The air itself seemed to vibrate with energy, and the entire facility groaned under the weight of the alien power source breaking down. Holt's heart thundered in his chest. His side burned with pain, but there was no time to stop. The mission was almost complete. The aliens were about to be defeated, but at what cost? The ground beneath them trembled like an earthquake, and the structure around them cracked, pieces of the ceiling and walls beginning to crumble away. "Move!" Holt barked, his voice rough with pain but filled with urgency. "We need to get out, now." Sarah, her face pale but resolute, looked back at the decaying core. "It's going critical. We have minutes, maybe less." Jackson, who had been keeping the remaining alien forces at bay, turned to Holt, her face twisted with concern. "What about Owens?" she asked, her voice strained. "We can't leave him here, can we?" Holt shook his head, grimly aware of the fact that Owens was still somewhere within the facility, likely hiding or already preparing to escape. But there was no time for vengeance, not now. Holt had been focused on the mission, and Sarah's discovery had given them their chance to win. But the price of that victory was becoming clearer by the second. "Forget Owens," Holt snapped, his voice hardening. "We can't save him, not now. The bigger threat is getting out of here alive." The team rallied around him as they sprinted through the facility, dodging falling debris and alien soldiers who were still fighting to hold them off. Holt could hear the sounds of their battle behind him, but his focus was on the escape. If they didn't get out, if they didn't make it to the extraction point, all of their sacrifices would be for nothing. As they neared the exit, the facility's walls began to glow with an ominous red hue. The core was destabilizing, and the alien forces were in full retreat, but they weren't done yet. The aliens were trying to stop them, trying to prevent the destruction of their power source. The floor beneath them trembled, and large chunks of metal and stone crashed around them. "They're still coming," Jackson yelled, her voice tinged with desperation. Holt turned and saw a new wave of alien soldiers rushing toward them. The momentary distraction had cost them precious seconds, and now the aliens were closing in. They had no choice but to fight their way through. "Hold the line," Holt shouted. "We fight now, together." With a rallying cry, Holt's team opened fire, their weapons roaring as they pushed forward. The alien soldiers were relentless, but so were they. Each blast from their guns struck the aliens, sending them stumbling back. Yet for every one they took down, two more appeared. Holt's heart raced as he fired again, knocking one alien soldier off its feet. But they were overwhelmed. The sheer number of aliens was too great, and despite their best efforts, Holt's team was being pushed back. "Fall back," Holt shouted, his voice harsh and commanding. They needed to get to the exit, and they needed to do it fast. The team sprinted down the final hallway, their footsteps echoing through the corridors as they ran toward the extraction point. Holt's breath came in ragged gasps, his body screaming with pain, but there was no choice. The team was almost there, but as they neared the exit, the lights flickered and the ground beneath them buckled once again. "Go!" Holt yelled, forcing his injured body to move faster. Suddenly, a massive explosion erupted behind them. The alien core had finally exploded. A blast of heat and energy shot through the facility, and the ground trembled so violently it felt as though the entire building was about to collapse. Holt barely managed to stay on his feet as the shockwave pushed him forward. The extraction point was just ahead. Holt's eyes locked on the hovering dropship, waiting for them to board. It was their ticket to survival, if they could make it in time. But then, out of the corner of his eye, Holt saw him. Owens. The traitor stood just beyond the extraction point, his back to them. He was walking toward the ship, his weapon raised, as though preparing to leave. Holt felt a surge of rage at the sight. Owens had betrayed them, and now he was attempting to escape with the very thing they had fought for. "You!" Holt shouted, his voice filled with fury. Owens froze, turning slowly to face Holt. His eyes were filled with cold, detached hatred. "You think you can win, Holt?" he sneered. "You think humanity will survive this? You're all just pawns in a bigger game." "Not anymore," Holt spat, his voice resolute. "And you won't live to see it." A final confrontation ensued. Holt was on him in an instant, despite his injuries. The two men struggled, the pain in Holt's side nearly unbearable, but adrenaline kept him going. Holt's hands tightened around Owens' throat, his anger at the betrayal clouding his judgment. But before he could deliver the final blow, a new wave of alien soldiers rushed toward them, guns blazing. Holt released Owens, pushing him away as the team opened fire on the incoming aliens. "Get to the ship!" Jackson yelled, pulling Holt back into the chaos. In that moment, Holt realized the fight wasn't about revenge. It was about humanity's survival, and he couldn't let anything, especially Owens, stand in their way. As they boarded the dropship and soared into the sky, Holt looked back one last time. The facility they had just fought so hard to escape was already in ruins. The alien core had finally been destroyed, but the cost had been high. Holt had no way of knowing if they had won for good or if the aliens would come back in another form. But one thing was certain, humanity had shown that it could fight back, no matter the odds. The dropship soared high above the Arctic wasteland, the once immense alien facility now a smoldering ruin far below them. Holt stared out the small window as the landscape grew smaller, the towering snowstorms and jagged mountains blending into the distance. The team had made it. They had survived. But at what cost? Holt's body was still aching from the wounds he'd sustained during the mission, his side throbbing with each breath. He felt the weight of everything that had happened, the lives lost, the sacrifices made, the treachery they'd uncovered. But amid the pain and the exhaustion, there was a sense of something else. Something deeper. As the dropship climbed into the sky, Holt glanced at his team. Jackson, though bruised and bloodied, was alive. So was Sarah. They had made it. The others, though, the ones who had fallen in the battle, would never see the future they'd fought for. The thought of those who had given their lives to stop the alien threat weighed heavily on Holt's heart. They had died fighting for something greater, but the mission was far from over. "Commander," Jackson's voice broke through Holt's thoughts. "What happens now?" Holt turned to her, meeting her gaze. She was still catching her breath, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes, the kind that only comes after surviving something insurmountable. But he knew, hope wasn't enough. "We rebuild," Holt said quietly, his voice filled with the burden of leadership. "We learn from this. We stay vigilant. But will we ever be safe?" Jackson asked, her voice tinged with doubt. Holt looked out at the horizon, watching as the stars began to reveal themselves in the distance. The universe was vast, and they had only just scratched the surface of what it held. The aliens were gone for now, but who knew what else was out there? "No one can promise safety," Holt said, his voice heavy with the weight of his experiences. "But we can promise one thing, we'll never stop fighting." The silence that followed was comforting in its own way. It was as if the team understood, this was just the beginning. Humanity had faced the impossible and survived. But survival wasn't enough. They had to grow stronger. They had to prepare for the unknown, whatever it might bring. The journey back to Earth was long and quiet, filled with the hum of the dropship engines and the occasional whispers of the crew. They all knew that the world had been changed forever. But the fight was not over. Holt understood that now more than ever. He had been a part of the battle for Earth's survival, but he had also witnessed the strength and resilience of humanity. They would never be the same again. Sarah, who had spent the entire flight poring over data, looked up from her tablet. "We've done it," she said quietly. "But there's still so much we don't know. The core's destruction has left a huge void. We need to investigate the long-term effects, the things we can't yet understand." Holt nodded. "We'll get there. Together." The team's spirits were high, but the reality of what lay ahead was never far from their minds. They had defeated the alien threat, but they couldn't afford to rest. There were still questions about the aliens, about Owen's motives, and about the vastness of the universe. What else was out there? And what did the future hold for humanity? As the dropship neared Earth, the familiar sight of the planet below them filled Holt with a sense of bittersweet relief. The war was over, for now, but the fight for humanity's future was just beginning. "We've come a long way," Jackson said, her voice filled with gratitude and pride. "We've lost a lot, but we're still here." Holt turned to her, his eyes filled with determination. "We're still here. And we'll make sure we stay here." As the dropship touched down on Earth, the team disembarked, stepping onto the soil of their home planet. The air was different here, thicker, more alive. And yet, there was an undeniable sense of change. The world had changed. Humanity had changed. In the distance, Holt could see the remains of cities, the signs of a world trying to rebuild itself. But the world was still alive, still fighting, still moving forward. He couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Earth had been through the worst, but humanity had proven that it could stand tall in the face of anything. "We'll rebuild," Holt said, his voice firm, resolute. "We'll make sure this never happens again." As they made their way toward the command center, Holt reflected on everything they had endured. They had lost friends, allies, and comrades. They had fought a battle that seemed impossible to win. But in the end, it was the strength of humanity, their courage, their unity, that had seen them through. That strength would carry them forward into an uncertain future. And as Holt looked back at the team, he knew one thing for sure: no matter what came next, humanity would always rise to meet it. Their resilience would be their greatest weapon, and with it, they would forge a future stronger than ever before. Life lesson: the true strength of humanity doesn't lie in weapons or technology, but in their ability to come together, to fight for what they believe in, and to never give up, even in the face of the impossible. The greatest battles are fought not just with strength, but with the unyielding will to survive and to protect those they love. The future of humanity was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Holt felt hopeful. The final battle had changed everything. And now, it was up to them to shape the future.